welcome to the July month's monthly lecture of Tamil Heritage Trust. Across the ancient caravan routes, where silk and spice once flowed, the Dhamma too travelled, woven into the whispers of merchants and the footsteps of wanderers. Not by sword nor conquest, but by the quiet commerce of traders, the Buddha's word sailed on ships and echoed in bazaars, carrying it into distant lands. The marketplace became a monastery of ideas, where merchants bore more than wares. They bore the light of awakening, spreading from port to port. Thus, Buddhism traveled within the caravans, its teachings mingling with the jingling of coins, its wisdom carried in the breath of trade winds. Welcome once again to this monthly lecture. Before we get started, I would like to give a brief introduction to Tamil Heritage Trust and its activities. Tamil Heritage Trust or Tamil Paramparya Arakattalai has been functioning in the last 16 years with a primary objective to help in the understanding, appreciation, dissemination, and celebration of India's rich cultural heritage. Towards this, we organize a number of programs. Perhaps our most popular program is the monthly heritage talks, including this one, that we have been conducting uninterrupted every month for the last 16 years. Every year in the month of June, we also organize what is called an Indology Festival, which is an annual online conference where we invite scholars from across the world to deliver lectures on a wide range of topics pertaining to Indology. This year's Indology Festival just got concluded in June, and it was a 6-day festival themed around the painting traditions of India. We also do what is called a Pecha Kacheri in the month of December that coincides with Chennai's music and dance season, which is a 2-day event where we pick a central theme, and we have a series of lectures around that central theme in the month of December. We also conduct several workshops such as how to see a temple, how to see a museum. This is part of our public outreach programs where we keep it open to the general public who would like to come and learn about the temple art appreciation and museum art appreciation. We also have classroom sessions. We have sessions on Pallava Grantha, Indian astronomy, Indian mathematics. We also conduct what is called a program called Alamar Avai, where we engage with the school teachers of Tamil Nadu from various parts of Tamil Nadu. We train them on various aspects of Indian heritage, and we thereby encourage them to become ambassadors of heritage within the student community, within the schools that they work. We also organize docent trainings, which is basically a training to prepare docents to present historical sites in a very professional manner to the audience. So as part of this, we have trained 3 batches of docents, and as we speak, these are docents that have engaged with a wide range of public audience and primarily on helping them appreciate the art of Mamallapuram. Every year, we do an in-house program called the Site Seminar. This is typically in the month of January. These are pictures from our latest site seminar to the Andhra region. So every year, we pick a region within India that contains a lot of heritage monuments, and we start preparing for the site seminar 4 months ahead of the trip, where we internally study, read, research the sites that we are visiting, the history, their art, and we go there collectively as a group to perhaps as a much better prepared audience. We also institute awards. We institute 2 of the awards. The first one is THT Professor S. Swaminathan Heritage Award. This is given to people who've been doing outstanding work in the field of heritage preservation or dissemination. We've been instituting this award since 2020. Our last awardee in the year 2025 was Falak Chowdhury from Mumbai. The other award that we help organize is the V. Venkaiah Epigraphy Award, which is instituted by the family of Sri V. Venkaiah, the first Indian epigraphist of this country. The award is instituted by his great-granddaughter, Mrs. Sunitha Madhavan, and Tamil Heritage Trust has been entrusted with the task of administering the award. This year's award, it is open for nominations. The last date was 30th of June, but we have extended it by a few more days for us to receive more nominations. So for those of you who are watching this video, if you have people who are doing outstanding work in the field of epigraphy, this award is mostly on epigraphy. So if you know of individuals who are doing outstanding work in the field of epigraphy, this would be a great opportunity for you to nominate. All our programs are available on our YouTube channel, and you can click on the bell icon and subscribe to the channel, and you should be able to watch all our programs, including this one, which will be recorded. We have a website, tamilheritage.in. We have a Facebook page and also a Twitter handle, and we have a mailing list. You could choose to follow any of our social media handles. If you wish to receive email notifications of our program, you could please send an email to the email ID mentioned there, and you will receive notifications. We are a not-for-profit organization. We receive our funds through well-meaning donors. So if you wish to make a contribution to Tamil Heritage Trust, here is the UPI ID and here is the QR code. Now coming to today's talk. Buddhism, perhaps more than any other major religion, is inherently associated with travel. As monks, merchants, and pilgrims traveled along the great overland and maritime trade routes of Asia, they carried with them not only goods, but also the Buddha's teachings, transforming Buddhism from a regional faith into one of the world's first truly global religions. The evolution of Buddhism into a global faith was thus deeply intertwined with the networks of commerce and cultural exchange that connected distant lands. The Tamil region was a vital hub in these maritime networks, helping sustain the movement of both goods and ideas across the Indian Ocean. In her talk today, Mrs. Sherin Someetharan will explore this remarkable connection and highlight the often overlooked role of the Tamil region in the spread of Buddhism. A few words about our speaker today. Mrs. Sherin Someetharan, IRS, is a government servant serving as Additional Commissioner of Customs and GST. With an academic background in history, she is an avid researcher of Indian art, architecture, culture, and linguistics, exploring their nuances through comparative and scholarly analogies. An avid photographer since her college days, Mrs. Sherin uses photography to document heritage and artistic traditions, often showcasing her work through curated exhibitions. She is also committed to mentoring students, guiding them in academic pursuits and competitive exam preparation. Without much further ado, I would like Mrs. Sherin to take over the screen.
Thank you, Kishore. Thank you for the kind words. I thank the Tamil Heritage for giving me this opportunity. Tamil Heritage Trust, in fact, when they asked me to give a talk for the month of July, they asked me to give a talk on some topic related to trade routes and maritime connections. And that was the time when last month around when we had the repatriation of the laden copper plates, and many of the newspapers, the TV channels had the news of the repatriation of the laden, the Animangalam copper plates from Netherlands, and how the copper plates are mention about Buddhism and the presence of Buddhism in the Tamil region, the patronage from Rajaraja. And there was so much of information around on how a staunch Saivite king, Rajaraja, in fact, gave land, grant, and many donations and He as well as his son and the other Chola kings, how they contributed towards Buddhism. That was the talk. So this topic, this particular aspect of Buddhism, being a religion so connected to trade routes, and why, despite not being a very prominent religion in the Tamil region, not a major religion, it had its presence for till now for around 2 millennium silently contributing to the culture, to the heritage of the Tamil region, and how this region, in fact, sustained and promoted for the religion. It helped in the spread of the religion. All these are very interesting topics, and this became all the more necessary when we were talking about the Animangalam copper plates and the repatriation. So in this particular talk, I just tried to bring out the importance of the trade routes and the maritime connections, and how this religion, in fact, utilized, or how this religion, in fact, was so closely tied to travel, and the religion as such is so inherently associated with travel. So this is an attempt to bring out the aspects of Buddhism and its trade routes and maritime connections, and also how the Tamil region contributed to the sustenance, to the trade networks, and to the spread of the religion. As I said, speaking about the Animangalam copper plates, these are the two charters belonging to the 11th century. So the first copper plate, the larger Leiden plates, since the plates were in Netherlands, the Leiden University, for a longer time, for around 300 years, they were called as the Leiden plates. But they were originally the Animangalam plates, the larger plates and the smaller ones. They are the charters. The first is about Rajaraja Chola's grant for the construction of a Buddhist vihara in Nagapattinam, and which was based on the request of a Sri Vijaya ruler, Sri Vijaya, which is the modern day Sumatra. And later, the second grant is by Kulothunga. It spoke about the renewal of the grant, and it, in fact, spoke about reduction of taxes and other the donations or the grants that were given by Rajaraja, and the special provisions that were granted to this particular vihara by Rajaraja was more or less continued, more or less it was renewed by this new grant of Kulothunga. So this is all about the Animangalam plates. So this brought to the limelight a lot of aspects related to the Chola ports, and how religions like Buddhism thrived here in the coastal areas, and how the ports, in fact, contributed to the movements, the maritime trade, and how the monks, the pilgrims related to Buddhism thrived because of these routes. So as we saw in this thing beginning, Buddhism as a religion is so tied to travel. So starting from Buddha himself, he traveled, and his disciples, the monastic community, and later the pilgrims, they spent so many years in travel. So the sanghas, the Buddhist, the monastic system itself was peripatetic, so tied to travel. And the Buddhist monks and nuns, they traveled for most parts of the year. They had only this vasa, the retreat, monsoonal retreat. Around 3 months, they are required to stay at a particular monastery, and they read the text. They were staying in a particular village or a monastery. They were teaching or doing meditation or some other practice other than travel. But apart from these 3 months of vasa, they traveled throughout the year. So the philosophy behind traveling was to not become so attached to a particular region and to contribute. Many of these monks and nuns, many were teachers, many had knowledge of medicines that wherever they traveled, they contributed to the local community there. They helped the people there. So they more or less they traveled and they did not stay to a particular place. So that was the basic philosophy of the religion itself. Well, as I said, the wandering Americans of Buddhism, the Buddhist pilgrims, they were pioneers in overland travels also. So when the religion spread beyond the monks, beyond the monastic communities, even the followers, they were the pilgrims who were the pioneers in overland spiritual travels. So pilgrim traveling from China all the way to the religious places in the in the Buddhist circuit, the areas that Buddha traveled in India. So if a pilgrim wants to visit all these places, they relied upon the traders, the trade route, and they traveled. This is very unique to Buddhism that they were the real pioneers in traveling as pilgrims in undertaking overland spiritual travels. So they traveled either by the Silk Route adjoining the entire Himalayas or the maritime trade routes from the Indian subcontinent to the South China Sea. So this was part of the greater maritime trade route that was spread from the Mediterranean to the South China Sea. So from the Mediterranean to the West Asia, the Red Sea, Arabian Sea to the coasts of Tamil Nadu to the Bay of Bengal, crossing the Straits of Malacca to the South China Sea. So this was the maritime trade route, and another land route was all along the Himalayas, along the entire stretch of the Himalayas. So the ones who traveled all along the Himalayan route, on the land route, they were associated with the merchant caravans. They traveled with the merchants, they traveled with the caravans, and for them to stay in a place, to rest, many monasteries, many centers of Buddhism emerged all along the coast, all along the Himalayan region. And at the same time, to even sustain, to even help the tourists, to help the pilgrims, the monks, and the nuns who traveled, even the maritime trade route had established a lot of centers all along the route, which had monasteries, which had places for the pilgrims and the monastic community to stay and continue their travel, since they traveled for days and months. So this is how the religion actually traveled from both the maritime trade routes of sea and land, maritime trade route and the land route. Buddhist centers all along the Himalayas, if we see, they are so connected. The Silk Route, as we call it, is so connected to the Buddhist tradition. Even now, if we see, the Buddhist centers all along the Himalayas are very intact. You have right from the Pamirs to the China mainland. We have many centers of Buddhism and many traditions of Buddhism that are still followed and are still intact even after 2 millennia in the Himalayan circuit because of the trade route. Because when the caravans, when the merchants traveled, they had the pilgrims, the monks along with them, and for them to stay, monasteries were established, centers were established. They developed into bigger ones, bigger towns, which became prominent Buddhist centers, Buddhist towns, which continue to remain Buddhist centers. So even now, if you see Tibet or in Nepal, along Bhutan, all the Himalayan kingdoms have Buddhism intact. So with the monastic support and infrastructure all along the altitude, the passes, the valleys, it helped the religion to thrive. The other route monks and traveled, the scholars traveled, was the maritime trade route. So it extended from South Asia to Sri Lanka, Southeast Asia, and China. So which was part of the ancient maritime trade route. So it was majorly, it carried silk, spice, it connected Europe, the Mediterranean, and China. They had different trade routes. They had, even if we take the maritime trade route, the ones that were from the Mediterranean, some they crossed the Mediterranean, they crossed the Arabian Peninsula till the southern parts of the Arabian Peninsula to Oman or the other regions by land route, and then they took the sea route. Some took the Red Sea route, and they traveled via Arabian Sea, reached the west coast of the peninsula or the east coast, and then to the Straits of Malacca and the South China Sea. Many traveled based on the monsoonal winds, or some hugged the coast, and they more or less traveled all along the coast, the land. So that they had different maritime trade network, trade route. So this is a map which gives a understanding of how the monsoon current works. So they had very clear understanding of the monsoonal winds and the reversal of the winds. So when the southwest monsoon was there during summer, they traveled eastwards. So when the wind was favorable, and likewise when there is a wind reversal during the winter months around, they traveled westwards. So this fair knowledge of the winds helped the traders to have a safe travel. They ensured that they had a safe travel, maritime travel, without any accidents or without any major issues. So they followed the current, they followed the winds. So traveling eastwards, if we take the Southeast Asian region from India, so when we cross the Bay of Bengal and the Andaman Sea and enter into the Straits of Malacca, the Gulf of Thailand, all along the Gulf of Thailand, the countries like Malaysia, the present Thailand, Cambodia, and Vietnam are dotted with the ports, ancient ports all along the coast. So this is from the 1st century or 2nd century BCE to the till the 12th or 13th century it thrived. So the most ancient kingdom that flourished by this maritime trade was the Funan kingdom. So the Funan kingdom dominated much of Southeast Asia. It is the first maritime kingdom of Southeast Asia. This kingdom was a major force in spreading religions, in spreading Buddhism. So be it Bhakti, Saivism, or Vaishnavism that traveled to Southeast Asia, or Buddhism that traveled to China via this region. This region had the maritime character, and it was completely a maritime kingdom and an Indianized kingdom as well. So since the 2nd century BC, we get evidences of trade. Even before we get inscriptions or any recorded history, we have evidences of a trade that flourished in the centuries prior to the Common Era. So this Mekong Delta, which combines areas of Cambodia and Vietnam, the southern part of Cambodia and Vietnam, they are well connected by canals. So there are a lot of major tributaries and distributaries of the Mekong River, which entirely occupies the southern part of Cambodia and Vietnam. And the canals help the merchandise from the ports to be taken inland through the canal routes. So Okyo, this entire culture where we get a lot of artifacts, right from coins to Roman pottery to many of these beads, to the earliest sculptures of Buddha or Vishnu, many aspects of related to Saivism, we get from the southern part of Cambodia and Vietnam together, called as the Okkyo region, Okkyo culture. So the place Okkyo is at present in Cambodia, in Vietnam, and the major center, the major port, and the place which could have been the capital of the Funan Kingdom was Angkor Bure, which is right now in Cambodia, which was again a major center. And both Angkor Bure and Arikemedu had many similar Roman ware, many similar artifacts, and even Ptolemy in his map of the world, he mentions about Angkor Bure and Arikemedu. So he mentions about Angkor Bure as the port that is located at the mouth of Mekong. And the artifacts, the similarities of the artifacts between the eastern coast and the southern part of Vietnam and Cambodia, the Funan region, is a very important evidence to understand how the trade flourished, and by which the merchants, they either both for bhakti, for the merchants who had the pilgrims and the monks and the followers of Buddhism, they traveled along, and even the merchants who established temples and who took the religion of Saivism and Vaishnavism to this part of Southeast Asia were initially in the Funan Kingdom. So the Roman golden medallions, Indian pottery, and even the earliest inscriptions of this particular region we get from the Funan Kingdom. So the earliest inscriptions are the earliest writing of Southeast Asia itself is the Grantha, Pallava Grantha. So the earliest inscriptions, they were majorly in Sanskrit. In fact, the largest corpus of Sanskrit inscriptions outside India is found in Cambodia. So the earliest inscriptions, the writings, many can be found in this region. So for a better understanding, this is the route by which they traveled. So when we say the Cholas treated the Bay of Bengal as their lake, it was literally it was about crossing the Bay of Bengal, the Andaman Sea, entering the Straits of Malacca, and then reaching the Gulf of Thailand, where port cities were dotted all along the coast. And then they traveled northwards to reach China, the southern part of China, to ports like Guangzhou and the other ports. So this maritime network that was spread from the Mediterranean Sea to the South China Sea. When you look at the map, the picture, Tamil Nadu was located, the Tamil region was in a very strategic position that it dominated the maritime trade for such a long time. So even before the recorded history, even before we have any literature or inscription, from the archaeological remains and the excavations, we understand that the Tamil region had, the people had fair understanding of the maritime trade routes, and they traveled both westwards and eastern, to the eastern direction. So this particular aspect of the maritime trade, that there is no comparison to any other region in the whole world which is so strategically located and that dominated the maritime trade for such a long time, for more than a millennia. So even before the Common Era to the downfall of Cholas, or even after the downfall of Cholas, we had other trading communities that dominated till the arrival of the colonial powers. So for more than a millennia, or almost 1,500 years, they completely dominated the trade. And despite the political and social changes that the Tamil region had, be it the Pallavas or the Cholas, the trade continued, and even socially, the dominance of religions like Jainism, which was considered a major threat and the reason for the Bhakti movement to kickstart the revival of Saivism and Vaishnavism, and Buddhism was not very dominant as Jainism, but still it existed as a minor religion in the Tamil region. So, despite whatever the religious scene, whatever social changes that took place in the Tamil region, and even the political change, the trade survived. Merchants, the merchant communities, the ones who involved in trade, they were respected, and this was one of the major incomes revenue of the political powers that were in that ruled for these centuries, for all these centuries. So for thousands of years, the dominant, the dominance, the knowledge of the seas, the knowledge of the trade winds, the knowledge about the ships, uh, the commodities that were traded, and be the port regions, the ports in the Tamil region acting as ports of call, and all these, in fact, it's a very interesting aspect to understand. These are some of the earliest sculptures. These are, in fact, the earliest sculptures of Buddha that we get in the Funan region, in the Mekong Delta. These are wooden ones. They are present in the National Museum of Vietnam. So these are the wooden Buddha sculptures that we receive. And again, in the Cambodian side of the Mekong Delta, these are some of the ancient Buddhist sculptures that we see. The pillars with Buddha, with the lotus, the lotus pillar. I mean, explaining about his sermon in the Deer Park, and another standing Buddha. And when we talk about the Kaudinya legend of Southeast Asia, in Southeast Asia, all the kingdoms, be it the Funan kingdom of Cambodia or the Champa kingdom of Vietnam, or the kingdoms of Malayapura, Sri Vijaya, all of these kingdoms had a legend associated to Kaudinya, that a person from India, a Brahmin from India, traveled to Southeast Asia, and he married a Naga princess there, and the ruling dynasty begins from them. So this association of Kaudinya, being a traveler from India, and that is how the entire kingdoms, all the kingdoms in the Indochina region attribute their origin, their lineage to the Indian origin Kaudinya. So the story, the legend of Kaudinya marrying a Naga princess there, it is mentioned in many inscriptions. It is mentioned in many of the um, right from the Funan kingdom up till Suryavarman IV, who built Angkor Wat, or later Jayavarman VII, who's supposed to be who's considered to be the greatest ruler of the Khmer Empire. All of them had their inscriptions that talk about their lineage and ancestry. It begins with Kaudinya. And again, when we see the Pallavas, even the origin of the Pallavas, it is related to the king marrying a Naga princess, and the legend, the continues, the chronology begins, and both Kaudinya and even in the Pallava heritage, they trace their ancestry to Ashwatthama. Again, another similarity. So though they do not mention Ashwatthama as their forefather or an ancestor directly, they mention that blessed by Drona as Ashwatthama, and then they start the Kirti with the with honoring gods Vishnu, with Brahma, Vishnu, and then Drona, Ashwatthama, and the Pallava rulers. Names begin. Even the Vaikunta Perumal Kovil's panels, the first 8 panels, they speak about this lineage starting from Ashwatthama. And even the Sanskrit inscriptions that we get in Cambodia, they have this lineage, and the first ruler they always mention that as Kaudinya, and who traveled from India to a Naga princess. So this association is there. Even in Vaikunta Perumal temple, the Naga princess association is there when tracing the ancestry. Even the Kasakudi copper plates or the Velur Palayam copper plates, they maintain the same lineage when mentioning this. And some legends, some Chinese texts of the early medieval times, they mention Kaudinya as a Buddhist, as one of the disciples of Buddha. So, for instance, the Liang dynasty that ruled in the 6th century in the southern part of China, that mentions about Kaudinya being a Buddhist. So Liang Shu is the book that was completed by Yao Liang in the 7th century. In fact, the Liang dynasty was very prominent in the 6th century, and this book, when it was completed in the 7th century, it mentions that Kaudinya was originally a Brahmin from India. He was one among the first 4 disciples of Buddha. There was a supernatural voice that said to him that he will be the king of Funan. The whole kingdom received him with joy, went before him, and proclaimed him king. He changed all the laws according to the ways of India. So the Chinese texts, when speaking about this Kaudinya legend, they always mention him as a Buddhist. So this is this is an interesting connection when talking about the trade routes, how different legends are told across different regions in this maritime circuit. When we talk about the Srivijaya Empire, the present Indonesia, Sumatra, the Buddhist centers of Srivijaya Empire that thrived between the 7th and the 13th centuries, they were crucial transit points for Chinese pilgrims and Indian scholars. So the second route that we were talking about, if not the Himalayan route, trans-Himalayan route, if we take the maritime trade route, Srivijaya Empire is right at the entrance of the Straits of Malacca, the major entry point to the East Asian or the Asia Pacific region. Since Buddhism is followed almost 98+% of the population in the Asian region or the Asia Pacific region, this particular area acted as a focal point, acted as a major point of contact or a center which helped transmit ideas from the West and the East. It was more like a central point. So Srivijaya Empire, since they patronized Buddhism, the centers that dominated the maritime trade routes of the Straits of Malacca, they became by default centers of Buddhism. So the monastic networks were central to the spread of Mahayana and Vajrayana Buddhism. So Srivijaya Empire was a major empire that helped in the spread of Buddhism. So for an understanding, this map which has the present Sumatra Island, which was the early Srivijaya Empire, had Palembang. Palembang was the ancient capital of Srivijaya. It was a Buddhist center and a major stopover of pilgrims and monks and scholars traveling to the Buddhist sites in India. As I said, the Buddhist pilgrims were the pioneers in overseas travels. So pilgrimage was not restricted to few hundred kilometers or some place within the country or within the particular geographical region. They traveled, they ventured beyond their countries, and the urge to visit the places that Buddha traveled, that Buddha walked, or the where Buddha's remnants, where the Buddha's relics were there. Ashoka's text, the text of Ashoka mentioned that Ashoka established 84,000 stupas all along the Indian subcontinent. The inscriptions even mention that even up till the Chola, the Pandya, and the to Tamrapani, to all these regions, up till those areas, the stupas were established. And they had some relics of Buddha, be it the ash or a hair or a tooth or a bone, that was distributed to different parts of the subcontinent, and those places became very those places became the pilgrimage sites of the people who followed Buddhism. So when the Chinese or the persons from Southeast Asia wanted to see these places in the Buddhist circuit, they had to travel, make a big voyage, and they stopped in many places in between. So Palembang was one of that, and 84,000 could be an exaggerated, is definitely an exaggerated figure, but hundreds of stupas were supposed to have been established by Ashoka's orders. So when we take Palembang, Palembang was a stopover. It had a lot of monastic institutions. It had many places for the pilgrims, monks to stay, and we had a lot of scholars coming to Nalanda, and they either landed in places like Pundugar in the ancient times, or Nagapatnam in the medieval times, or the ports of Kalinga. And then they reached Nalanda and other places like Amravati. So to all these places, the urge to walk the path of Buddha, or to get the texts of Buddhism, to collect the texts of Buddha, the various teachings of Buddha, all these made the scholars travel in search of knowledge related to the religion and Buddhist philosophy. So while traveling to India, this was a stopover. And the Talantua inscription of 683 CE, it is one of the earliest Pallava Granthams that we get. That is from Palembang. So it is discovered in Palembang. It speaks about one king, Sri Jayanasa's initiatives based on Buddhist Dhamma. This inscription is all about establishing a park. The king wants to establish a park based on Buddhist Dhamma, and what are the different trees that are to be planted, and how the different creatures will be benefited by the trees, by the fruits, and what is Buddhist Dhamma all about, his teachings, and all these are mentioned in this particular inscription. It's supposedly one of the earliest old Malay inscriptions written in Pallava Grantham. And so this is one of the places of Sri Vijaya Empire. Monastic institutions all along the trade routes, they became centers of Buddhist religion. So initially established as monasteries, and thriving population was there. So many visitors as pilgrims and monks started coming there. The place had a lot of businesses around, and it started becoming a Buddhist center. And eventually, since it was a stopover, many places were stopovers. The Buddhist monks, the pilgrims, they had debates, discourses among themselves. They stayed together for a longer duration, and eventually they all became centers, and centers of learning as well. So here the monasteries, more and more monasteries were established, and they were frequented by monks and traders. And in the Tamil region, many Buddhist centers like that flourished in Kanjipuram, in Pumbugar, Nagapatnam. And further interior, we have evidences of Madurai, Urayur having Buddhist monasteries. So this map is just about the different trade centers, the ports of the Tamil region, starting from Mamallapuram to Mamallapuram, since Kanchipuram was the capital of the Pallavas, Mamallapuram was their major port. And even before the Pallavas, Mamallapuram existed as a port where we have the literary references referring to Mallai as a major seaport, and Arikemedu again. And Arikemedu, we have many Buddhist sculptures being excavated in and around Arikemedu. Arikemedu, as I mentioned, it is one of the major stopovers. It is one of the major ports in the Roman trade route. So it had connect with the Southeast Asian. And after the Sangam era, after the 3rd century CE, it has lost its prominence. But the excavation of Buddhist sculptures there indicate that it continued to act as maybe a minor port with an amount of Buddhist population staying in that area. And then Pumbugar as mentioned in the Sangam literature or later in the epics of Silappatikaram and Manimekalai, direct references of Buddhist monasteries and Buddhist monks living there, and how during the ancient times, like in the 2nd century, 1st century BC, and later in the early centuries of the Common Era, how the Greeks and the Romans frequented Pumbuhar, how they had established their colonies there and stayed there. And slowly Pumbugar lost its prominence after the 5th or the 6th centuries, and later because of the sea, because of maybe a cyclone or a tsunami or whatever, some climatic changes, and it lost its prominence, and Nagapattinam slowly took over as the major port in the eastern region of the Cholas, in the eastern coast. And we had Tundi, we had Devipattinam. Devipattinam is again mentioned. It had travelers coming from different parts of the world. Devipattinam even has a Hebrew inscription belonging to the 13th century, which indicates that there was a thriving Jewish community, if not big, a small Jewish community thrived in Devipattinam. And Alagankulam was one of the major ports in the Sangam era. It was a big port. And then Periyapattinam again, mentioned by travelers like Ibn Battuta and others. And the southern ports that were very prominent, especially during the Arab trade, Kailpatnam or Kulasegarapatnam, mentioned by Marco Polo and others, like how Pumbugar lost its prominence and Nagapattinam slowly rose into prominence. Korkai during the ancient era was very prominent in the Sangam time, which slowly lost its glory, and the Kailpattinam kind of replaced its place. And even travelers like Marco Polo, they mention as the city of Kailpatnam and Kulasegarapatnam, all these places, they rose to prominence. So there's a continuous presence of ports, different ports. These are some of the major ports. There were other smaller ports as well in the eastern coast that in fact helped the trade community as well as the people of different religions to have exchanges, to stay. Many different communities thrive there. They were more of cosmopolitan in nature, with the travelers visiting. And for the travelers who visit these places, we have references of monasteries being built there, Buddhist monasteries or mosques being built there, since they are frequented by the merchants who wanted to pray in these areas also, who followed a particular faith. Buddhism, when we see the history of Buddhism in the Tamil region, scholars say it entered the Tamil region in 3rd century BC. So the time when Ashoka's daughter Sangamitra traveled around 240 BC to establish the Buddhist nun order. So, despite not becoming a dominant religion, under the patronage of the ruling dynasties, merchants, traders, artisans, and the people, Buddhism flourished till about 12th century. 12th century and even after the 12th century, we have references of Nagapattinam being an important Buddhist center, and about the Chinese pagoda that was in Nagapattinam, that is mentioned even in the late, even till about the 19th century, in the 1800s also. So, though it may not have been a prominent force, it survived, it had its own share of followers. It was present until the 12th century AD, it flourished. So after the Sangam age, if we take Silappatikaram and Manimekalai, both refer directly to the patronage of Buddhism. So we have the presence of monks in Pumbugar and Kaveri Pumpattinam. So Manimekalai, when we take the epic Manimekalai, she chooses to commit herself to the Buddhist path. So she becomes a Buddhist nun. She she meets her teacher Aravanadigal in Pugar. Later, she goes to Vanji. She comes to Kanchipuram and later meets Aravanadigal again in Kanchipuram. So centers like Pumbukar and Kanchipuram were centers where Buddhist centers where other religions flourished, and Buddhism had its share of followers. It had its monasteries, as we have seen, like in Kanchipuram, we have a lot of Shiva temples. We have Vishnu temples. There is Siva Kanchi, Vishnu Kanchi, Jaina Kanchi. And likewise, Buddhism had its own followers with the visitors from other countries staying there in Kanchipuram, in the Buddhist monasteries of Kanchipuram as well. So, these two centers in the post-Sangam age were Buddhist centers here. And Pumbugar, if we see, it was a cosmopolitan hub of commerce and trade. So it also was a town that had thriving Buddhist monasteries, stupas, viharas, and a large number of monks. And it was frequented by Buddhist scholars also. So, and Pugar is mentioned in both these epics as a place which had maritime trade, and the trade routes were mentioned, and how the coastal communities, the societies were interconnected. And even maritime trade is explained in Manimekalai also, how the coastal societies involved in trade, in maritime trade. So Puhar as a center was so connected to this maritime trade, and the Kanchipuram, though not on the coast, but being the Pallava capital, it had its own smaller ports, and the bigger port of Mamallapuram, which is so connected to the ancient maritime trade route, had the Buddhist population present in the town. So these are some of the earliest Buddhist artifacts that we get in Pumbuhar from undersea excavations. Buddha and the footsteps of Buddha that are in the inside museum of Pumbuhar. And Kanchipuram, as I said, it is one of the classic examples of a religion that thrives in a trade route. So, though not on the maritime trade route, being the capital, it always had merchants, it had visitors, it had monks of different faiths, followers of different faiths staying in the town. So, Mattavilasa Prahasana, the 7th century play of the Pallava ruler Mahendravarman I, it speaks about Buddhism. It speaks about the Buddhist monk and the religious scene of Kanchipuram as a town, about different sects of Saivism and Buddhism. So from this we understand that Buddhism was very much present in Kanchipuram. And accounts and traditions regard Bodhidharma as the 5th century prince from Kanchipuram. So Bodhidharma is scholars say that he was a Pallava prince who traveled from Kanjipuram to. There are different theories that say whether he traveled by the land route or the sea route. Some scholars mention that he traveled from Mamallapuram to Southeast Asia and then um, to the southern part of China and to Luoyang, to where the Shaolin monastery is there. And others mention, many other researchers say that he took the land route, that he crossed the Pamirs, traveled along the Himalayas, walked along the Yellow River, and then reached Luoyang and the Shaolin monastery, which is the birthplace of Chan Buddhism or Kung Fu, whatever. So that many accounts and many traditions, the Chinese traditions, the Tibetan traditions, many accounts refer to Bodhidharma as a person from Kanjipuram. So this is a very important tradition that is there in many of the Chinese accounts and other in the accounts of many foreign countries, that Bodhidharma is associated with this region. And again, Vajrabodhi, one of the pioneers for spreading Buddhism in China and Southeast Asia, a master of Vajrayana Buddhism. And even many theories are there, like how he traveled, his route, how he came to Sri Vijaya, and how he was escorted by the Persian merchants in ships to the king of China. And so Vajrabodhi, again, one of the pioneers for spreading Buddhism, is supposed to have been lived in Kanjipuram. He is from Kanjipuram. And many consider him as a person from Kanjipuram, and even many Tibetan texts, they consider Padmasambhava Rinpoche, the guru, as the master of Vajrayana Buddhism, to have visited Kanjipuram and associated with Kanjipuram. And in fact, the Tibetan texts, when you see the Tibetan tradition of Buddhism, they have 24 sacred places associated with Buddhism, and Kanjipuram is one among that. So many traditions consider Kanjipuram as an important Buddhist center. And about Xuanzang, a 7th century Buddhist traveler, a Buddhist monk, he made an overland journey from China, and along the trade route of China, he traveled to India. He visits many parts of India in the 7th century, and he visited Kanjipuram also. He mentioned that many Buddhist monks stayed there. Monks from Sri Lanka stayed there. There was some internal conflict, internal issue in Sri Lanka, that many monks had come here, and that Xuanzang could not visit Sri Lanka. He couldn't go to the island, and he returns back, continues his land route. So these references about Kanjipuram's religious landscape is explained by Xuanzang. He mentions about a Buddhist monastery, with Buddhist monks, and he also mentions that a grand stupa was there in Kanjipuram. And Buddhist sculptures in and around Kanjipuram, even till this date, we have regular unearthing of statues, Buddha statues in Kanjipuram, in and around Kanjipuram, in the district as a whole. Even we have unearthing of Buddha statues in so many districts, in Tiruvannamalai, or in places around Senji, in Ariyalur, in many of these places, in Trichy. But in and around Kanjipuram, the number of Buddha statues that are excavated, that is a major proof that Buddhism survived here for a longer time, for many centuries. So since the Pallava dynasty, it relied upon the trade route, and even before the Pallava time, when we see the early Pallava time, or the time when the epics were written, Kanjipuram is always referred to as a center of trade and a place which is very robust, very it's a commercial hub. So it continued even during the Pallava time when it was a capital, and for a very continuous period, it had exchanges, it had visitors, it had merchants and others coming in to the town. So it's also driven by the strategic port of Mamallapuram um, during the Pallava time, and they also had secondary ports like Vasava Samudram or Pattinam that we have references from the Sangam age and which continued in the Pallava time as well. And coming to the medieval times, the merchant guilds, in fact, dominated the maritime trade routes. And in the Tamil region, we had different merchant guilds like Manigramam, Ainuriver, like Anjuvannam. All these merchant guilds were very powerful. They even had naval fleets on their own. They even helped the emperors in their maritime expeditions. We have references. So they were very powerful. So these guilds always as a policy they had contributed to the construction of temples, and the merchant guilds are one of they are one of the main reasons for taking bhakti to Southeast Asia. Their contribution to the construction of Shiva and Vishnu temples in Southeast Asia is immense. So more than the royal patronage, even before the royal patronage, in the early centuries of the Common Era, it was majorly the merchants contributed, and the priests they traveled with the merchants. The merchants always had a set of religious priests who traveled with them, and they, in fact, had settlements in the places where they stayed in Southeast Asia, and wherever they stayed, there and further inland, they constructed or gave donations for construction of temples and many temples or viharas, be it Saivism, Vaishnavism, or Buddhism. So these are some of the examples. Manigramam Merchant Guild had fortified settlements at Takwapa, again a port along the Gulf of Thailand. And in 1088 CE, there is an inscription of the Ainuriver guild, Ayavole or the Ainuriver guild that was discovered in Barus area of Sumatra. Barus again an ancient port. Ptolemy, the Greco-Roman geographer, he mentions Barus as Barusei in his accounts in his world map. And so this place in Barus, again a place known for maritime trade, we have an inscription of Ainuriver and their contributions to the region. And it mentions about a thriving Tamil merchant community in the Barus region. And after the Pallavas, it continued through the Chola era. They had diplomatic missions being sent to even China. We have a Tamil-Chinese bilingual inscription of 1281 found in South China, in Guangzhou, which proves the presence of, it speaks about a Tamil merchant community there. And coming to Nagapattinam, the 7th century Chinese Buddhist monk Yi Jing, he documents about his travel to Nagapattinam, how Nagapattinam was so connected to the maritime trade networks, and how Nagapattinam was a primary port of arrival. So, as I said, people from the pilgrims or monks from China, from the eastern side, when they have a stopover in Sri Vijaya, places like Palambam, they in fact reach the eastern coast. They touch the shores of the east. They first enter Nagapattinam. From there, they have their onward journey to Amaravati or Nalanda, or to even other places in the Tamil region also. So he highlights Nagapattinam as a port of arrival and even touched by traders. Both the Buddhist pilgrims, the monks they visited, and majorly it was touched by the traders along the eastern coast. And it is an important port of call again, being a transit to the traders, and Buddhist pilgrims were en route to other sites like Amaravati or Nalanda. So the maritime network that extended up till the Arabian Peninsula or even further beyond to Europe, the southern part of Europe. Nagapattinam was again another stopover. It was a port of call. It was a transit for traders. It had facilities for the merchant community to stay, to the inhabitants, the population in Nagapattinam were so used to the traders staying, being in transit, and the pilgrims coming in and going out of Nagapattinam. So, as in the beginning of the talk, I mentioned the Anemangalam copper plates again is associated with Nagapattinam. It is the 11th century record. So the Sri Vijaya ruler Mara Vijayotunga Varman, in memory of his father Chudamani Varman, during the reign of Rajaraja I, since they were Buddhists, they wanted to construct a Buddhist vihara in Nagapattinam. And Rajaraja, he patronized, he gave royal grants. And Kulotunga later, he renewed the agreement that was once signed in Rajaraja. He later renewed in the year 1090. And he gave more grants, and he again renewed the policies that gave tax exemptions and other contributions to the monastery. So we had ties between Nagapattinam and China as well, and we have references about the Pallava rulers building Buddhist viharas in Nagapattinam in the 8th century for the visiting Chinese merchants and monks. And later, even after the Pallava time, Nagapattinam flourished, and as Kaveri Poompattinam or Poombuhar lost its prominence, Nagapattinam became all the more important. It became a very important Buddhist center. And discovery of huge number of Chinese coins in and around Nagapattinam and the adjoining regions, part of the Chola territory along the port. It is a proof that we had a very prominent connect with China. And Marco Polo, he visited Nagapattinam in the late 13th century. He documented the city as a trading hub and a Buddhist center with a Chinese pagoda, a brick Buddhist monastery with the Chinese inscriptions that he mentions. And later we have another reference, the Kalyani inscription of 1476 by King Dhammasetti of Begu, Burma. He too mentions about the presence of a Chinese monastery in Nagapattinam. So these are the references that we have for about the Chudamani, about not Chudamani, about the Chinese monastery, and a pagoda that is associated with the Chinese that was present in Nagapattinam. And Nagapattinam was later occupied by the Portuguese, the Dutch, and later the British, and it continued to be a trading hub. And Chinese pagoda in Nagapattinam, as mentioned by this inscription of Dhammasetti or by the travelers, it was even mentioned later. It was mentioned. We have references that it was demolished in 1867 accidentally. And Chinese pagoda in Nagapattinam is multi-tiered. It was multi-tiered, and it was built for Chinese merchants. It was called as Puduveli Gopuram or Black Pagoda. It stood as a symbol of Buddhism and Sino-Indian maritime trade. And the number of Buddhist bronzes and stone statues we discover in and around Nagapattinam region, this is really remarkable. This is more than any other region that we get such a large number of Buddhist artifacts in the Tamil region. In fact, around 350 Buddhist bronzes of Buddha we have excavated. It is excavated in the Tamil region. In the region of Nagapattinam alone, in and around Nagapattinam, we have around 350 Buddhist sculptures alone, and lot other stones, the sculptures of Buddha are excavated around Nagapattinam. And even now, as like Kanjipuram, we have intermittent discoveries even now. Every now and then, we have a Buddhist sculpture being excavated from the Nagapattinam region. So all this prove that Nagapattinam was one among the major Buddhist centers of ancient and medieval India that played a very important role in the religion, in transmission of the religion, in that supported, that sustained the pilgrims, that the merchants who accompanied the pilgrims, the merchants who were responsible for bringing the monks, the pilgrims to the country, and again for further going back to their countries. So the evolution of the religion is deeply tied to ancient trade networks, and the Tamil region played a critical role in sustaining. And as I mentioned, though it did not become a major religious force like Jainism, it maintained a calm and continuous presence in the Tamil region for over 2 millennia, and it flourished with the patronage of Tamil royalty and the maritime commerce. So, since maritime commerce survived despite the political and social changes, be it the change of dynasties, the Pallavas or the Cholas, or even the societal changes about the thriving religions, whatever it is, maritime commerce thrived even after the downfall of the Cholas. Even after the 12th and the 13th centuries, we had thriving trade. The eastern coast, all along the eastern coast, we had the Muslim merchants, the Maraikayas dominating the maritime trade of the Coromandel coast to up till Southeast Asia. So till they continued even up till the colonial times. So the remnants were seen even during the colonial times. So it was a continuous process. So for 2 millennia, the Tamil region dominated the trade networks, and by this, Buddhism was prevalent continuously for these many centuries in a very silent way, though not a very prominent religion. It had influenced the literary works, it had influenced the culture, the ethics, the values of the region, and it helped in many of the art that we art schools that we talk about, be it the Gandhara art or the Amaravati art. We had the influence of all this, since Buddhism is a religion related, which is so tied to all these art schools. We had influences. We had Buddhist sculptures that were very similar to Gandhara art or the Amaravati art. So there was exchange of these aesthetics and arts as well because of the prevalence of Buddhism in the region. So the pivotal location of the Tamil region, the mercantile connections, as I mentioned, it brought in a vibrancy to the art and philosophy. And the merchant guilds again, they not only had their settlements and fortifications, but they funded the construction of Buddhist stupas and monasteries, not just in the Tamil region, but all along wherever they traveled in Southeast Asia. They enabled the safe travel and infrastructure, gave infrastructure to the scholars and pilgrims. And this remained as a region that fostered significant scholars, like I said, Bodhidharma or Vajrabodhi and other scholars, and the monks who visited the regions. And so it more or less acted as one of the crucial launch pads for Buddhism in the earlier times, and it to spread the religion to Southeast Asia and to China. And it enabled the cross-pollination of styles of art, aesthetics, and iconography of the regions where the faith spread. And Buddhist ethical values embedded within the cultural and literary landscape of the region. We have the influence of Buddhism, be it the compassion or the ethics, the values that are embedded within the culture, within the heritage of the region, though not as a religion. It survived for a longer time. So with this note, I would like to conclude my talk. So I had given just an introduction to the landscape of how Buddhism as a religion thrived on travel, how it thrived on trade networks, on maritime trade routes, and how the the monastic communities, the pilgrims were pioneers in travel, and how the Tamil region supported in the spread of this religion, and how there was a confluence of ideas, exchange of ideas in terms of art or literature. And all these connections are well understood when we take the trade routes, when we study the trade routes. So with this, I conclude, and I thank Tamil Heritage Trust for giving an opportunity to talk for this month of July. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Sherin. You can stop sharing your screen and we can have a Q&A.
Yeah.
Very nice. Like they say like we say in Tamil, ஆரவாரம் இல்லாத பேச்சு. So very simple, direct communication, and it was a thoroughly enjoyable presentation. So first of all, thank you for that.
Thank you.
We do have a few questions from the audience, and I have a few questions as well, so we can kind of go back and forth. We have inscriptions by kings. Obviously, the most famous Anemangalam Cheppede. You also spoke about merchant guild donation inscriptions like the Manigramam and Ainurvar. Do we have any accounts or inscriptions where the Tamil rulers were funding the travelers to help spread Buddhism to these countries? Do we have those inscriptions?
No, to my knowledge, we do not have inscriptions speaking about Tamil rulers who had sent Buddhist scholars or priests to go and spread Buddhism. If there is any other inscription like that, then I'll stay corrected. But as far as I know, there is no direct mention of any any Tamil region's ruler sending mission or sending a group to spread Buddhism.
Monks or any of that. We don't. Okay.
No, we have references about embassies, diplomatic embassies with going to China, meeting the Chinese ruler, but it is not Buddhism specific.
Right. Question from Ravi Shankar. Unlike Jainism, we see Buddhism being largely a coastal phenomenon, right? We don't see a lot of Buddhist centers being in the mainland, right? How do you explain this? Maybe with a few exceptions, right? So is it fair to say that it is largely a coastal phenomenon, and why do we see this difference?
Probably since the topic that we spoke right now, it had a lot of travel element in it. It had a lot of travel. When you see the ones who spread Buddhism from India, or the ones who wanted to come and see the places of Buddha, it was all restricted to the ports, and the centers were the main, the regions, the Buddhist centers were the main places where we had all these activities, and they were restricted to the ports more or less. So the initial one, even when Sangamitra traveled to Sri Lanka, it was all about crossing the seas and going to distant places. And I think that is one of the reasons why we had a very less number of references inland when compared to Puhar or Nagapattinam. And maybe Nagapattinam being a major Buddhist center, we can say that in history that is the major Buddhist center so far, when you take the Tamil region into consideration. So that is majorly because of the royal patronage and how the Cholas, in fact, continuously supported the Buddhists to be, present in Nagapattinam. So there is a continuity in this thing, and because of the rise of bhakti also. So when Jainism and Buddhism started having a foothold in the Tamil region, so Jainism, yes, more because of royal patronage again. Because at that point of time, we did not have any royal patronage to Buddhism like that of Jainism. So we had royal patronage. We had kings who were Jains. Then we had the Bhakti movement coming up, and Buddhism never had this royal patronage. And even under Rajaraja was a staunch Saivite. He was tolerant. He was a tolerant ruler. So he just supported the establishment of monasteries for the monks to travel and places to stay, the grants, donations, and all of that. But it did not have any royal support, as in even to the extent what Jainism had.
Right. There are a couple of questions on language, and I will combine them. One question is on what was the language used for communication by a large portion of these trade merchants, and then the other question is how do they manage the language barriers, right? So I'll combine the two of them, right? So language. What was the common language that most of the uh, Buddhist monks and travelers used?
I think more or less the local language only, because even when we see about the writings, early writings of these regions, they were different. I was speaking about the inscription that we got in Palembang, which is one of the oldest evidences of old Malay. So
Correct.
it is written in the Grantham. Grantham was devised. It was actually it was formulated to write Sanskrit. So Sanskrit was the elite language. So even Pallavas here, they used Sanskrit. The local language was Tamil. The people in the region spoke Tamil. The kings spoke Tamil, but the language for royal degrees, for communication, for inscription, it was Sanskrit. It was considered as the scholars' language, and that was taken to Southeast Asia as well. So in Cambodia or Vietnam, we had the royal decrees in Sanskrit, and in certain occasions in the local language also. In Cambodia, we have Khmer inscriptions. As we saw, the old Malay inscriptions were there, and the communication would have been just getting accustomed to the local language. If you see this inscription, if someone is interested in etymology or linguistics, even this particular inscription from Palembang, it is a very small inscription that only speaks about the establishment of a park in Palembang that would that is established according to the laws of Dhamma, Buddhist Dhamma, and how it will, help different creatures, living things to live there and get benefited and all that. And that old Malay words, if you see, there are a lot of similarities with Tamil and Sanskrit also. So it says all the creatures will eat the fruits that is from the orchard. For eating, they have used the word Tinnaka, Timaka, which is very similar to Tamil. And about the appearance, look, the word Rupam is used in the same inscription. So Talaga is used for pond, Tadagam.
Pond, okay, Tadagam, yeah.
Yeah, so many of these in the same inscription. So there could have been a lot of exchanges, but it was never like we have. And the merchants, whenever they were there, we had in their local languages only the references. So there was not spread of any language like Tamil was spoken there, or they brought in Malay here, or that was never there, except for the Sanskrit being used for the royal degrees.
Right. You just mentioned the Malay inscription. You also mentioned the Hebrew inscription in your lecture, and we
Yes,
have a
yes.
question on that. Can you tell us a little bit more about that Hebrew inscription?
There is in Devipattinam, 13th century Hebrew tombstone was discovered, and the Hebrew tombstone has writings in Hebrew in it. It belongs to the 13th century in the Devipattinam port. So in the place near the port, the excavations. So maybe there were Jewish traders who visited this place frequently, or there was a very small Jewish community in this particular place. Could have been, but I haven't done any research on this. But in Devipatnam, there is a this thing tombstone of 13th century Hebrew link. There could be some Hebrew link with it. Some trade, yeah, from that region or settlers from that region being here and locally, mixed with the local population. That is possible.
Right. There are a couple of questions also about the why the travel is largely east, southeast focused, and why do we not see enough of the west? Well, there is something on the west because the Buddhism travels towards Gandhara and then to Central Asia. But I think the question is about why is it not more western coastal or maritime on the west, and why is it more on the east?
I think the history itself is the explanation, because even in before the Pallavas, or even before during the Sangam time, it was more of the Southeast Asian links. When we refer to the Saivist Vaishnavite influences in Southeast Asia, we have very early references, like as early as 3rd century or 4th century, images of different manifestations of Vishnu, be it the reclining form. We all have in the eastern side. Maybe because of the geographical proximity, that could be one of the reasons. Traditionally, we had this spice trade. We had many of these exchanges from Southeast Asia. Um, because of regional geographical proximity, we had our spices being exported to Southeast Asia, and from there we had all these fragrance coming from camphor. Even Barus is known for camphor. So camphor or other sandal, this thing, anything, or many of the textiles also. We had silk coming from the eastern side. I think it's more of a historical continuation of, going towards the east. And if we travel towards the east, we have the geographically the land is closer, and west, if we travel, it was more of it should be either the north. And north, definitely Buddhism traveled in the land route all along the Himalayan region, as you said, from the Pamir to the Chinese this thing. So till Mongolia, we have. So north, yes, we have. West, it's more of the sea, and east, you have geographical proximity to land. That is one of the reasons, and maybe because in the medieval times, after the rise of Islam and other religions, many prominent religions being there, and you do not have a history of having that religious influence over those places. So, be it Judaism or Christianity or Islam. So, those were all the religions that originated from that place, from West Asian regions. So here we have, even before the Pallavas, Saivism and Vaishnavism traveled to east. So we have Buddha sculptures as early as 2nd century. We had the Buddhist monks traveling towards the east and the north. It's more of geography, I would say.
Right, right. Did the artisans also travel with the traders and Buddhist monks?
Yes, definitely. The artisans traveled. Many artisans, they traveled with the group, which comprised of the traders, which comprised of the priests, They many a times we had maybe exchanges. They went there for a few months or some time. They stayed with them with the local artisans. There were exchanges they had, because many of the influences that we see in symbols and iconography in Southeast Asia, we have a direct connect. But though it is not a simple a photocopy of what is there in the Indian mainland, there is so much of originality and local flavor to it also. The art that emerged from Southeast Asia, but definitely the artisans too did travel. We have references of artisans traveling back and forth.
Right. There is another question on, is it fair to say, or are you inferring that unlike Jainism, Buddhism had lesser royal patronage? Is that something you would say?
Yes, definitely it had lesser royal patronage. We had the Pandyan king being a Jain. We have references. Many of the we even in the epics, if you see, the landscape of the Tamil region itself, we had more of a Jain influence. We had among the Aimberungapiyangal, Ainjirungapiyangal, the five big epics and the five smaller ones, majority were Jain texts. So that was possible because of the royal patronage. Royal patronage is definitely one of the reasons, and the acceptance of the population also. Anywhere, even now, you have Tamil Jains, a very small group of population. I'm not sure about the numbers, maybe around 30,000 or something. One of my friends who follows that was telling around 30,000. They are Tamil Jains who are Jains for hundreds of years, all these years, still now. Tamil Samanargal, they call. Yes, they worship the Tirthankaras. They have the festivals associated with Mahavira. They have the temples, and I think it all kickstarted with that royal patronage initially.
I guess the question wants to challenge that assertion, which says, why do you say that, but particularly given that Ashoka was such a big patron?
I didn't get it. Despite Ashoka being a big patron.
Despite Ashoka being such a big patron, why do you still assert that Buddhism, unlike Jainism, had lesser royal patronage?
Yeah, in the southern part, yes. And even when you say, even in the northern part, it did not, even despite Ashoka's patronage, even after he establishing hundreds of, stupas or with the relics being spread to different parts, even after a point of time, even in the northern part of India, it did not dominate. That again, in the local region, in the Tamil region, we did not have a patronage. Like there was no big, no opposition to the religion. There was,
Got it.
it just silently existed. So that is one of the major reasons. And Ashoka was more of spreading. He sent missionaries and he wanted people, Buddhists, to travel to all parts of the world and spread the word of Buddha. So it was more or less restricted to that, the philosophy being spread, and after that, it lost its momentum. It really lost its momentum, and after Ashoka, the subsequent rulers, and even after the revival of Saivism, Vaishnavism, and even after the Guptas in the north, Buddhism did not get a prominent place.
So it is in the context of the Tamil country that you are making that point.
Even here, only when compared to Jainism, it had a lesser prominent place. But when compared to the Bhakti, when compared to Saivism and Vaishnavism, even Jainism lost its prominence.
Right. There is a follow-up question with respect to the whole East-West discussion that we had. The question is, there are coins that we get in Arikameda. We have Roman coins in early BC. Why is it that Buddhism did not travel that route or did not travel enough in that route? When we have evidence of trade with Romans and we have coins that are found with the West, why is it that Buddhism does not travel that route?
Yeah, this is an interesting question. Again, I could only visualize the geographical proximity of it because trade was a very important factor that connected people. So the Romans came here for the only purpose of trade. Even they did not want to spread any religion here, and we did not, never. It was about taking the religion towards the Roman or the Greek Empire side. It was more of a spice trade, pepper trade. The ones that we had imported were, from the West, from the Arabs, the horses, or we have evidences of, having wine and other aspects. It was more tied to trade, but it's a very interesting question. Why it didn't, why it did not travel to that place? Why the effort was not taken to take Buddhism towards the West, and it was only restricted towards the North and the East. One thing in the medieval times, the resistance again. You had established religions there, whether it is this thing. In not that there were not established religions in this part, but to the magnitude of Judaism or Christianity or Islam. So that could be one of the reasons why. And asking about Arikameda, that was even prior to the major religions. But it was more of a trade contact that we had with the West and geography also. If we compare the distance between the Tamil region and Sumatra, Tamil region and Cambodia, it was more of it is very far. And the similarity also in culture, like if I was mentioning about this Angkor Bore and the Mekong Delta. So the Mekong Delta, which is in both the countries of Cambodia and Vietnam, that is the rice bowl of the region. That is
That
one of
region.
the, yes, that is one of the most fertile regions of the world. Which is the tributaries and distributaries of Mekong, and the land in between the canals are so fertile, which is very similar to the Kaveri Delta, which is the rice bowl of this region. So I think the proximity also, since we even say it was the Bay of Bengal was Chola Lake, because it's definitely it's a big distance. It's a distance that is not compared to a lake, that cannot be compared to a lake, but definitely when compared to the Mediterranean or Arabia, to Africa, the eastern coast of Africa, this was very proximate. Perhaps that is one of the reasons. And the initial kickstart that was done by Ashoka, the missionaries going from the Indian subcontinent to Sri Lanka, Southeast Asia to East Asia to China, Japan. And I think that started with the Buddhism gaining more and more momentum. I think this is the reason. Perhaps there could be other reasons why it did not go westward when places like Arikemedu flourished. Yes.
Did the viharas also serve as lodges, travel lodges for the traders?
Not for the traders, I think. The traders maybe who practiced Buddhism. But viharas are mostly the monasteries. It belongs to the monastic communities. So we
Right.
had different sects in Buddhism. And all these different sects of Buddhism, they had different monastic orders, different traditions, rituals. Everyone had different set of rules, their own, rules. So it is more, viharas are restricted to the monastic communities. And all these Buddhist centers had places for the traders to stay, who could visit these chaityas. Chaityas are prayer halls, or whatever the temples or even the viharas, to pray and then go back to there, because there are references about lodges eateries and other places being constructed for the traders to stay.
Are there any reference to the travelers? Like, I know, are there names of these? Do we know of names of any of these travelers? Of course, the most popular ones are Yuan Sang,
Yeah.
Kumarajiva, but do we know names of travelers who went southeast?
Who went southeast?
Yeah.
Yeah, as we mentioned, like Vajrabhuti, who traveled to Southeast Asia. So, in references say that he took the Southeast Asian route to go to this thing. And even the scholars from Kanjipuram who took the Southeast Asian. And we had scholars going to Nalanda, like Dharmapala and others from Kanjipuram who were scholars in universities. We had exchanges and places like Kanchipuram again, they were Buddhist centers of learning also. So people had stayed there for a longer time and studied as well. So there are names, like as you said, these are the prominent names, Fahin or Yeet Singh or Yuan Song, or the scholars or the teachers, the masters who traveled from different parts, even from the northern part of India also, many from different regions from the Himalayas who had traveled to different parts from the Tibetan, Buddhism. We have a lot of travelers, but these are the prominent ones who like traveled thousands of miles in centuries ago. They traveled these many miles.
Right. Why is it that despite Kanchipuram being such a ancient center of Buddhist learning, we see very little Buddhist monasteries uh, at this point of time?
At present, that is majorly because of the rise of Saivism and Vaishnavism, the revival again. So we had in Kanchipuram, as we say, we have Vishnu Kanji, Jaina Kanji, and there are centers for different, all these four religions, Buddhism, Jainism, Saivism, and Vaishnavism had its own history, its own followers during the Pallava, the pre-Pallava time. But when the Alvars and Nayanmars they revived Hinduism, when they revived the Saivism and Vaishnavism, more and more prominence, more and more dominance of these religions, the construction of temples. The temples were not just centers or like places of worship. When there was a conquest of a king, the money, the wealth that they acquired, that went into the temple. The traders, they traded when a flourishing merchant community was there, that went into the temple. And so it became a very strong organization itself. So the temples were not just temples as in a place of worship. In the Tamil region, there were places where art, the culture was preserved. You had different forms of art, and people's lifestyles were associated with, so closely connected with the institution called the temples, be it a Shiva temple or a Vishnu temple. You had festivals all around the year, and you had dance forms being associated, epigraphy, be it history, be it sculpture, be it any grants to any agricultural activities or anything that has been recorded. So it's a place of record keeping. It is a place where arts survive. It is a place for religious worship, for entertainment, for every. So that became very strong that Buddhism or Jainism could not survive beyond the 7th or 8th century. I mean, to that level of this thing. I mean, to that prominence, to that importance.
Right. Very good. Very good. Well, on that note, thank you so much. Like I said, this has been a fascinating lecture. There are several things for us to learn from here and for us to like you said, it is wonderful coincidence that this discussion with you is happening around the same time when the Ane Mangalam Cheppede, the repatriation of that to India, and there is so much of talk around that, and we are also having this talk around it. So it has been a sheer it's been a pleasant coincidence, so to say. Thank you once again for this excellent talk, and we thoroughly enjoyed interacting with you over the last 1.5 hours. Thank you very
Thank you
much.
so much. Thank you very much, Kishore. Thanks to Tamil Heritage Trust for this opportunity. As you said, this is just an introduction to this topic, and there are so many different areas that are connected to this topic. When you talk about maritime connections, trade routes, the religions that spread to different places, the art that is connected to it, the temples or the symbols, motifs, iconography. These are many allied topics that automatically come when we talk about subjects like this, about Buddhism being a religion tied to maritime travel and all that. This introduction can be further, elaborated or strengthened with more research and more details. So thank you so much for this opportunity, and I thank Tamil Heritage Trust for it.
Wonderful. To our viewers watching this online, thank you for joining us, and we will continue to stay in touch through our upcoming programs. Please continue to follow Tamil Heritage Trust's YouTube channel and